The Vans Warped Tour in the 1990s was something legendary. It was fresh and exciting, and it's pretty different from the more pop-punk focus scene you might remember from the same tour during the 2000s. It was raw, it was chaotic, and it was absolutely essential for anyone immersed in the youth culture of the time. What's going on, everyone? Before we dive into today's video, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe if you love 90s music nostalgia. With that out of the way, let's break down the bands that defined the 90s Warped Tour experience. Sublime. Before Sublime became a staple on frat party playlists across the country, they were the scrappy kings of the inaugural Warped Tour in '95. There was shirtless Bradley Knoll, sweating through an erratic, soulful set, while Lou Dog famously trotted between the amps as if he owned the stage. Their sets throughout the tour felt loose and improvised, displaying how musically tight the group is. However, the group also often performed intoxicated, pissing off more than a few people in the process. Because of this unprofessional behavior, along with stories of Lou Dog biting several skaters and crew members, the band was kicked out of the tour not long after it started. They were brought back for a few shows later on in August, but Sublime's Warped Tour run was basically a train wreck that somehow sounded good. Pennywise. If Warped Tour had a house band in the 90s, it was Pennywise. They embodied the aggressive, bro-core, skate-punk spirit that Kevin Lyman built the entire tour around. The celebratory chaos of people piling on stage, the mosh pit growing bigger than ever, and the crowd chanting along that ensues whenever they start playing Bro Him, is stuff that you'll end up reminiscing when looking back at that time in your life. Experiences like this were the closest thing Warped Tour had to a religious ritual back in those days. Bad Religion. By the time Bad Religion hit the main stage in '98, they were already punk royalty. They brought a level of intellectual gravity to a lineup full of, let's be honest, snot-nosed kids. Hearing Greg Graffin belt out Infected and 21st Century Digital Boy validated the tour as a serious musical force, rather than a bumbling teenage wasteland. Bad Religion is one of those groups that showed punk rock could grow up without selling out. Respect. Blink-182. Like many newer bands of the time, Blink played mostly the side stages back in those days. They spent the stage time cracking jokes about their dads and playing super fast pop punk before Enema of the State turned them into MTV darlings. In the late 90s, Blink felt like the bridge between the raw skate punk of the early decade and the polished pop-punk explosion that was coming. They were snotty and they were immature, but they absolutely sounded undeniable. And they were set to be one of the biggest groups of the coming decade. No Doubt. Right on the cusp of Tragic Kingdom taking over the world, No Doubt was grinding it out on the '95 tour. And let me tell you, Gwen Stefani was an absolute force of nature. This was a month or two before the release of Tragic Kingdom, so the band was far from the household name they will become. However, she owned every bit of the stage during this run, commanding the crowd with an energy that most of the male-dominated punk bands couldn't even touch. The band sounded amazing. Gwen exuded confidence at every stop. Looking back, they carried the aura of a band about to blow up, and everybody felt it. Limp Bizkit. Ooh, controversy. When Limp Bizkit first took the stage in 1997's Warped Tour, they were virtually unknown. Rumors even circulated that their label paid the organizers to get them a spot on the tour. Like other lesser-known acts, they played early in the day on the second stage. While there, however, they left an impression, with the band quickly gaining a reputation for having some of the most energetic sets in the whole lineup. By the end of the summer, the band was drawing bigger crowds than usual for a second stage act. They reprised their appearance a year later during the one-off Warped Ozfest crossover event, where they were one of the few acts from the 50 or so bands that appealed to both the punk and metal audiences alike. The Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. By 97, ska wasn't just a side stage curiosity, it was the main event. And these guys were the plaid-clad ambassadors of the entire movement. That year, the impression that I get was absolutely inescapable. And their live set was a masterclass in pure energy. Dickie Barrett's voice sounded like he was gargling gravel, while Ben Carr was a marvel of human endurance as he energetically danced non-stop for the entire duration of the set. It was the absolute peak of the ska core explosion, loud, brassy, and dressed like they're attending a wedding after the show. L7. While the Riot Grrrl movement was often underground, L7 brought that sludge-heavy, unapologetic angst to the mainstream festival circuit. They were heavier than some of the guys, scarier than some of the punks, and they delivered some of the most ferocious sets of the '95 tour. L7 reminded everyone that grunge wasn't dead, it was just getting meaner with age. NoFX. Fat Mike might have had a love-hate relationship with the commercialization of punk, but NoFX's presence on the tour was a badge of honor for the scene. They were the independent kings, refusing to play the MTV game while somehow drawing the biggest crowds of the day. Their sets were 50% fast melodic punk and 50% banter where they'd just roast the crowd. And you know what? The crowd loved every second of it. Rancid. When street punk hit the mainstream, Rancid was leading the charge. Mohawks, suspenders, and all. Tim Armstrong and Lars Fredriksson brought this Clash-style authenticity to the '98 lineup that felt both dangerous and unifying at the same time. Time Bomb live in the late '90s? That was the ultimate skanking anthem. Eminem. Okay, this is the weirdest and most legendary booking in Warped Tour history. Just before the Slim Shady LP made him the biggest star on planet Earth, Marshall Mathers was literally getting pelted with water bottles by confused punks on the '99 tour. It was chaos. But it also showcased Warp's willingness to embrace the counterculture of hip-hop, even if the audience wasn't quite ready for it yet. Wild times. Deftones. Before nu metal became a dirty word, Deftones brought this dreamy, atmospheric heaviness to the early Warped years. Chino Moreno's vocals, switching from a whisper to an absolute scream, cut through all the standard three-chord punk noise of the day. They represented the heavier, more experimental edge of the tour, and they stood out because of it. Less Than Jake. The working-class heroes of the ska punk scene. While other bands blew up and burned out, Less Than Jake was the reliable engine of the late '90s Warped Tour. They brought confetti, they brought humor, and they had incredibly tight horn sections. Going to a Less Than Jake show made you feel like you were part of the biggest inside joke in the world. And honestly, that feeling was priceless. Social Distortion. Mike Ness brought the Johnny Cash vibes to the punk rock parking lot, and I mean that in the best way possible. Social D added this soulful, bluesy grit to the '97 lineup that separated the men from the boys. There was no moshing during Ball and Chain, just a lot of swaying, singing along, and respecting the absolute legends on stage. 311. Here's where things get interesting. In 1996, the fusion of reggae, rock, and rap was hitting its peak, and 311 was leading the charge. They brought this laid-back, positive vibe that was honestly a necessary break from all the aggression of the hardcore bands. Down was the song that united the skaters and the stoners. It was like the perfect chill moment in the middle of chaos. Suicidal Tendencies. You might expect Suicidal to have been a staple of the early Warped tours, given their skate punk/thrash crossover status, not to mention the bandana and basketball jersey outfits they rocked since forever. But they were actually disbanded during the festival's formative years. By 1999, though, the band had gotten back together and recorded a new album, making them a no-brainer to be one of the featured bands on the tour. At the main stage, their crossover thrash sound continued to stand out, offering a harder, more intense edge than most other bands in the bill, almost sounding like they never took the last few years off. Real Big Fish. Okay, real talk. You could not walk 10 feet in 1997 without hearing Sell Out. And here's the thing, the irony was delicious. A song about selling out that literally became their biggest commercial hit? Chef's Kiss. Real Big Fish brought the energy, the horns, and the self-aware humor that made the late 90s ska scene so fun. Sick of It All. Up next, the New York hardcore legends. Sick of It All absolutely terrified the suburban pop-punk kids and kept the pit in mosh pit. These guys brought pure aggression and authenticity to the tour, and if you weren't ready for a hardcore beatdown, you stayed far away from their stage.